Hi and welcome. I'm Azusa Oda, author of Japanese Cookbook for Beginners and the food blog Humble Bean. Today we're going to be making musubi, also known as onigiri. And I love onigiri musubi because it's a handheld food which you can take to go and kids love it. And also there's endless possibilities. So let's get started. Today we're going to be making two musubis. One is a kind of like a traditional classic Umeboshi Musubi with my little twist, and also a Takikomi Gohan musubi. And for today's demo, I'm going to be using this rice. It's called Yuki No Kakera, and it's a variety that's relatively new, and it combines Koshihikari, that variety, and Mochigome, which is the sweet rice used to make mochi, to get kind of like a hybrid. So the rice is a little stickier than your typical rice, and it tastes good even when it's like cooled down. So it's really good for, you know, using this rice if you want to pack some musubi for the picnic or, you know, in a bento. So I'm going to go ahead and put this rice in the pot. You'll notice I'm using an Instant Pot. I'm going to show you how to make it in here. It makes really good rice. So I'm going to take 2 cups of this rice. And I'm actually going to subtract 2 tablespoons of this rice. And instead add red rice. This red rice is gonna give the rice a little bit of a pink color, which I thought would really be a nice complement to the umeboshi that I'm gonna put inside the musubi. So that's gonna go in here as well. I'm gonna show you how to wash this rice with using more of a traditional method. And for that, I'm gonna add some water in here and kind of get the grains wet. Okay, so basically the movement is like a scooping movement and then pressing down. And what you're doing by doing this movement is rustling the grains against each other to kind of rub the starch off. And so I'm gonna do this very gently. And while I'm doing this motion, I'm also gonna be rotating the pot clockwise. So this is what it looks like. Okay, now I'm going to rinse this off. So I'm going to go to the sink and do that. Okay, you can see in this first wash, it's very milky. So I'm going to tip this water out. Again, being very careful not to let any of the grains go down the drain. And then I'm going to repeat that process. And so I do this usually about 3 rounds of kind of scrubbing the rice and then rinsing it off. So the water's not going to become totally clear, and that's okay. You don't want to wash it too much. Okay. So now I have the washed rice, and I'm going to leave it to strain like this for a little bit, and that'll help you get a precise water measurement when we go to cook it. So after about 10 minutes, I'm just going to, I emptied the pot of water because some water had accumulated down here. I'm going to add this rice, and then I'm going to add the same amount of water into the pot. Okay, and here's a little cooking tip. We're gonna add, there's this Takara Mirin, and if you add 2 teaspoons to the rice, we have 2 cups of rice, 2 teaspoons of this, it'll make your rice a little fluffier. So if you don't know what mirin is, it's a fermented alcoholic cooking. It's used for cooking, but it's naturally sweet because of the fermentation process. So we've added a little bit of that mirin in here. And that's it. I'm gonna stir this up a little bit, and then it's gonna go in the Instant Pot. And it'll cook for 3 minutes, and then natural release, which takes about, I think, an additional 10 to 15 minutes. So all in all, it's not necessarily faster than cooking it in a rice cooker or the stove, but I think the quality of the rice is really nice, actually. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So for our second musubi, I'm gonna show you how to cook it in a different way on the stove. You'll notice, I don't have a rice cooker, so this is how I usually cook my rice. I already put 2 cups of that Yuki No Kakera in here, and I'm gonna go through and wash it using a different technique. So I'll be right back. You'll notice that this rice pot, or this pot, is a little bit smaller, so I can't exactly get my hand in to wash it the way I usually would. So what I've done is usually I would make a claw out of my hand and then use that to kind of agitate the grains inside the pot. And the whole purpose is to get the starch off. So as long as you're kind of getting those grains to rub up against each other to release some of that starch, I think it's enough. So I can feel the grains like hitting my knuckles, and you can already see that water, that residual water, is getting very, very white from all the starch being released. And then you can see the water is not totally clear, but it's transparent enough. So I'm gonna go ahead and drain this, and it's gonna drain for about 10 minutes. Okay, so while that rice is draining, I'm gonna show you what we're gonna put inside the Takikomi Gohan. So Takikomi Gohan kinda means to be cooked in or with the rice. I have carrot, which I'm gonna cut on a diagonal thinly. And then I'm gonna cut it this way, crosswise, into thin, I wanna say matchsticks, but they're very small. And in addition to that, I'm gonna put in some aburaage. Aburaage is deep fried tofu, and it comes in a long rectangle. I cut it in half, and we're just gonna use half. But because it's deep fried, there's some excess oil in it, so I'm gonna get rid of that. Usually, you put it in some boiling water, and then you have to drain it, squeeze it, but I have a little shortcut. So I have a paper towel here, and I'm gonna just wrap the aburaage in the paper towel. And then I'm gonna take a rolling pin and roll over the aburaage. Aburaage is usually found in Japanese stores, markets, maybe an Asian market in the refrigerated section or the freezer section. So check both. And you can see already that it has released some of that oil. So we're just getting rid of that excess. Okay, and now we're going to cut the aburaage similarly in a similar size as the carrot. So I've cut it into thirds, and now I'm going to cut it crosswise like this. Okay, the next item I'm gonna put in is Shimeji mushrooms. You can also use dried shiitake if you don't have shimeji, but I'm just going to maybe pull apart some of the smaller mushrooms, and I'm gonna just eyeball it. This was one package, so I'm not gonna use the full package of shimeji mushrooms. And then the last thing I'll add to the rice is this ginger, a few slices of ginger. Okay, so I have 3 different types of shoyu from Kikkoman. I know this is a well-known brand, but maybe these are different varieties that you haven't seen before. This one here is a double fermented shoyu, and it has a very kind of deep and like a round flavor. I don't know how else to explain it, but it has a very kind of rich flavor. It's very good. And this other one is smooth and aromatic. I would say it's not as kind of deep as this one, but this one is also a very nice shoyu. And then this one is gluten-free. I'm gluten intolerant, so I really appreciate that they have a product like this. And instead of the wheat that they put into these, rice is used. So for today's purposes, I'm going to use this one, but if you don't have a gluten intolerance, try using one of these other ones. You can kind of do a taste test and see which you like better and maybe which would go with which purpose. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out the soy sauce in a Pyrex, in a measuring cup. And we're going to do 2 tablespoons of shoyu or soy sauce. And this is going to be in the cooking water for the rice. Okay, so that's 2 tablespoons of shoyu. And then I'm gonna do 2 tablespoons of this Takara Mirin. It's the same mirin we used in the other musubi. And the reason why I measured it in the measuring cup is I'm gonna put enough water to hit about 1.5, a little over 1.5 cups. So I'm gonna go put some water in here. Okay, and the last thing I'll add is a pinch of salt. And that'll give us a nice clean salt flavor. So this is all gonna go in the pot with the rice that I've drained. Okay, pour this in. Okay, the other thing I'm going to add is this kombu. It's a Dashi Kombu. So usually I use this for making dashi for miso soup or udon or anything like that. This is made by Shirakiku, and you can see it has this kind of white residue on it, and that is what we want. It's the umami. And I'm going to just cut a little piece off for, it's kind of a oddly shaped piece, but I'm going to cut maybe a piece like that and maybe another piece, and let that sit just right on top of the water. And then I'm going to add the carrot on top of the water, on top of the rice. And so once you put these ingredients in, we're not going to mix the rice because we want the rice to cook evenly. Then I'm going to put the Aburaage. And finally, maybe the ginger next. And then finally the Shimeji on top. Okay, this is going to be really nice. So now I'm going to put this on medium heat, and when it starts to boil, I will cover it, bring it down, the heat down to low, and then hit the timer for 20 minutes. Once the timer rings, I turn the heat off and I let it sit there and steam for another 10 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on over the heat. So this is starting to boil right here. So I'm gonna cover it. All right, so now that this rice is done, the Instant Pot rice is done, I'm going to lift this up. So here's the cooked rice. You can see it's nice and pink. And I'm gonna add some goma, some roasted sesame seeds here. So once the rice has been cooked, you don't want to kind of agitate the rice too much because it'll start to break the grain. So you want to be very gentle at this point. I'm going to add a little more sesame seed. This is about 2 tablespoons of sesame seeds. Okay, and to make musubi, you're going to need a small bowl of water for your hands, a little dish of salt, and I have a plate here ready for us to put the finished musubi. So I'm gonna dip my hands into this water and make sure my hands are completely wet. This is gonna prevent the rice from sticking to your hands. With 2 fingers, I'm gonna dip into the salt bowl and I'm gonna rub the salt on my palms. So that'll help coat the musubi in a little bit of salt. I'm gonna take maybe like a handful of rice. It's still hot, so be very careful. And I'm gonna toss it around and then indent a little hole in the center. I have here some umeboshi that I've pitted and cut up into quarters. I had a really big umeboshi plum, so a whole one was going to be too much. So I'm going to take a little bit of umeboshi and put it in there, and then cover it with some rice, and then begin to shape it. So to shape it, I'm going to use my less dominant hand. So in my case, it's the left hand as the base, and then my dominant hand, my right hand, is going to go on the top. And the right hand, or your dominant hand, acts as kind of like the roof of the triangular omusubi. So I'm going to just gently squeeze, and then I'm going to rotate the ball, squeeze again. And while I'm squeezing down with my dominant hand, I'm kind of squeezing it with my less dominant hand on the sides. And you really need to do this only a couple of times until you get your rice ball. And like I said, you want to be firm, but you don't want to crush the rice. You want it to stay nice and intact. So kind of be firm, but also gentle. So I'm going to do this again, wet my hands, double finger into the salt, and then I'm going to do another scoop of rice and kind of toss it around in my hand first, and then make an indentation for another piece of umeboshi, and then cover that up. And it takes some time getting used to, but once you get the hang of it, it goes pretty fast. So to finish off the Umeboshi Musubi, I'm going to take a shiso leaf instead of nori and wrap the shiso that way. Shiso and ume are like a match made in heaven. They're really good together. Okay, so our Takikomi Gohan is done. I'm going to take out the ginger and the kombu. Okay. So now I'm going to fluff the rice. And kind of try to incorporate the carrots, the aburaage, and shimeji gently. Like I said, you want to be very careful at this point so you don't crush the grains of rice. Okay. Just like before, I have my bowl of water for my hands, the salt, and I have also a larger bowl for my shamoji, for my rice paddle, so that it doesn't get sticky. Okay, so first step, like before, is to wet my hands. 2 finger with the salt and a scoop of rice. Still very hot. And shaping it just like before. It's really hot. So be careful not to burn yourself. All right, so now I'm going to wrap the musubi in nori. So this is from a full sheet of nori. I cut it in thirds, and then I'm going to cut it in half and use half of this third sheet. So I'm going to wrap this on the musubi, and that's it. So there you go. There's these 2 different ways of making musubi. Okay, so let's have a taste. I'm going to do the shiso one first. I have the crunchy goma, which has a nice toasted flavor, and the brightness of the shiso. And I didn't quite get into the umeboshi. And this umeboshi is really mild. It's not like super sour like some of the ones I've had before. So it has a nice mellow sourness, which is really, really yummy. And kind of like a really refreshing musubi, I think. maybe like a closer. Okay, now I'm gonna try this other Takikomi Gohan musubi. This is also really a balanced flavor. I have the sweetness from the carrots. The aburaage gives it a richness, and the shimeji, of course, has a textural quality as well as giving you that mushroom umami flavor. The shoyu and the mirin, like the mirin also adds like a nice mellow sweetness to it. And of course the nori also giving more umami to the flavor of the musubi. Thank you all for watching. I hope you try some of these musubi recipes at home. I want to thank Janum, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the programming. See you at the next one.